Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar session. For those of you who are aware, I'm Rebecca Black. I'm a Senior Sales Development Representative here at Mentimeter, and I'm honored to be alongside Mr. Victor Antonio. We actually found Victor via LinkedIn, was extremely inspired by his motivational speaking, his entrepreneurialism, all aimed towards helping businesses grow and sell specifically at a distance. That's something that we're going to be discussing here today. Throughout this webinar, Victor will be going ahead and kind of taking lead, talking about how we can sell at a distance, something fairly relevant in this climate. And throughout the webinar, I will go ahead and ask some questions and make sure we can really utilize his expertise to the full extent. Super lucky to have you here, Victor. You work with a lot of industry leaders, so we're really honored to have you join us for today's session.
Thank you, Rebecca. Looking forward to it.
Do you want to go ahead and start?
Let's jump into it. All right.
Let's do it.
The name again is Victor Antonio. You can look me up online. Little background, I came from the technology side, eventually got onto the sales side. I'm a fan of Mentimeter. I'm not just saying that because I'm on the platform. I love the program. I think when it comes to engagement, this tool is incredible. But what I want to talk about is remote selling, how to sell at a social distance. And you've heard this already, right? When the pandemic hit, I'm not going to go into what happened. You guys understand. We all understand what happened. For me personally, it impacted me because I do a lot of live workshops and keynote speeches. So when the pandemic hit and we went on lockdown in March, by April of last year, all cancellations started rolling in. All contracts started rolling in, cancel. Lost about 90% of my business. And at that moment, I said, well, we got to do something different. And I knew the virtual space was going to be real. So I redesigned the whole studio. And, it has been a blessing in disguise because the world has changed and it's not going back to what it used to be. We've now accepted virtual as part of our reality when it comes to doing business, more specifically, when it comes to selling. And so I had to make the hard pivot. I'm going to talk about what I did, show you some of the stuff I use, but more importantly, I'll talk about the studio a little bit. But more importantly, I want to show you how you can be more engaging and how you can develop a strategy to really keep people locked in when you're having a conversation. That's really the point of today. So now, is everything I present today meant for you? The answer is no. This is like buffet a la carte. This is my favorite statement by Bruce Lee. If you remember Bruce Lee, remember he came up with his own fighting style called Jeet Kune Do. I think it means the way of the intercepting fist. And what he found is that some styles were rigid, some were too fluid, didn't have enough structure, so he came up with his own style. And here's what he said when it comes to learning. And I love this phrase: absorb what is useful, discard what is not, and then add what is uniquely yours. Now think about that. That's a very powerful statement. So as you're listening to me, not everything I present is going to be useful to you. But again, absorb what is useful, discard what is not. But at the end of the day, you have to add what is uniquely yours if you want to be successful. I think we can both agree with that. So let's get into this thing. Let's talk about the virtual tools. First of all, let's talk about how to set up the look. Now, I'm going to go through some basic steps that I went through, and then I evolved into this look. Now, I want you to keep in mind one thing. Don't lower your standards. Let me tell you what this means. There's a lot of people who get online and really don't care what the background looks like. Give no thought to what this new look looks like. But this is now your first official impression when you're speaking to somebody. So let's not lower our standards because other people aren't doing it. Let's raise our standard, get that little bit of an edge when it comes to going online. Let me walk through some of the tools I had to go through, my evolution, but let me share some tools that I think you might find fascinating. The first thing is we got to have a good microphone, right? I like the Yeti. One of the things I like about the Yeti is that it's a really interesting microphone in that it has certain settings on the back. Now, I want you to imagine that you're sitting right here. The Yeti has what they call certain cardioid grabs. In other words, if this is the microphone, this is you talking, this is your client, you can have these conversations, right? But you can also program the Yeti where if you're sitting right here in front of the microphone, this is you right here, that's the mic, you can program it so it only covers you. What does that mean? Why is that useful? Because with the Yeti, it'll block everything out in the background. I actually had my Yeti on when I was actually having a conversation while next door they were putting in a new roof and the customers could not hear the hammering or the yelling that was going on. Now, listen carefully. People can forgive, I'll just say, crappy video, but they can't tolerate crappy audio. And you know what I'm talking about, right? You can kind of, it's more forgiving with video, but when it comes to audio, you got to have good audio. So you can use your earbuds or some plug-in stuff, from your Mac or whatever it may be, but get a microphone like this because it's higher quality and you're going to sound that much better. And again, everything matters when it comes to virtual selling. Next, get a nice camera. I like this HD camera. Again, this is one of the first cameras I use. What I love about this USB camera is that the Logitech is that it allows you, if you download the app, it allows you to kind of adjust the coloring. So you can have that beautiful warm glow and you can look your best. So again, it's the HD camera, records at 1080, which is high definition. And I think you'll like it. It's typically better than what most laptops or computer desktops have. So consider that as well. Next, how about this? I want to highlight something. When the light source is in front of you, you're always going to get beautiful lighting, right? But when the light source is behind, you're going to get dark lighting. Now, this might not seem like a big deal, but it is. Having the proper lighting is what makes the whole visual experience that much more appealing, especially if you have to demo something or show something, like physically show something. Having the right lighting is good. So let's talk about lighting a little bit. When we look at lighting, this is what I currently use in my studio. I have ring lights. Now, there are all kinds of lights you can buy, but I have one set up in front of me, off to the right, to the left rather, over here and over here, right? So I have this diffused light coming at me. Now, if you're just at your desk, you can just buy one ring light and put the camera. Notice that you could actually mount, your phone in there or just a regular camera. And all of a sudden you'll have this beautiful diffused look, right? Just beautiful lighting. Now, I always get the question, what are these orange things here? These orange covers actually go on the light. So if you're fair-skinned, very light-skinned, by adding these orange bands, these covers, it'll give you a really nice light. Combine this with the camera and you're going to look good on camera. How about this? Eye level is bi level. Well, we've all heard that phrase, but eye level is also important. When you have a camera, you want to make sure, like right now, my eye line is directly across my camera right now. Always have it at eye level or just a little bit above. It's like when you take pictures. We've all seen people take pictures. Nobody takes pictures from down here. We always take pictures from where? Up here. So by using this riser, you'll be able to kind of adjust it and make sure you're at eye level. So again, the biggest mistake I see is people have the camera too low and it's shooting up and it's never a flattering look. Headphones. If you're going to use headphones, use some noise cancellation headphones. Because usually what happens is you get feedback and that echo effect. We've all heard that, right? So I love these because, again, you have the echo noise cancellation both going on at the same time. So again, small investment, but might be worth your time. Next, let's talk background. I think background is super important. And by the way, let me move my head over there. So a background, this is called a step and repeat. It's called a step and repeat because you take your logo and then you repeat it throughout the background. Now you can buy these for like $150, $200 to have a beautiful background in the back, or you can do what this gentleman is doing, is use some type of cool background like a bookshelf. Now, warning, I've seen a lot of people use green screen or use the active key screen on some of these tools. The problem is if you don't have the proper lighting, if you have a green screen or you're trying to use a virtual background, the edging around you, every time you move, it tears. Not a professional look. Again, what I want you to take away from this is I want you to look pro. I want you to look super great. When people turn on that camera, I want them to go, whoa, look at that setup. And it's worth investing. You can get a nice studio setup, something very basic for, let's say, less than $1,000. Now, for some of you may say, that's a lot of money, Victor. Well, think about it. If you're going to use this type of setup for the next year or two, wouldn't it be worth it to have such a great setup that when people pop up online, they're impressed with how you look? So again, use something in the background just to kind of make it look good. Now let's look at some. Let's have a little fun here. Let's look at some of these backgrounds. And let me see if I can get rid of myself there. Here, in fact, I'll just get rid of myself for a second there. Now, what's interesting is that you look at these backgrounds, very different backgrounds. Like here, this guy, I call him helicopter head because when he was talking, he had a fan over his head. How distracting is that when somebody all you see is this spinning over their head, right? And you're like, oh, that's distracting. This lady right here, she looked like she was trapped in the attic. This guy right here, look at this. I swear those are Bed Bath & Beyond curtains, right? This guy looks like either the witness protection plan. This lady has a lot of stuff, a lot of clutter, can distract. Still my favorite. And I don't know, doors behind you just look a little creepy, or is that just me? I'm having fun with this, but what's the point? People will look at your background. So again, let's make the background look great. And if you're going to use virtual, make sure you light it up correctly so it's very well defined. Next, this is an easy one. Let's talk bandwidth. In other words, really look at your bandwidth. By that is, there's different websites you can go to measure your bandwidth, but these are kind of some of the numbers you're looking at. One website I like going to is fast.com. Fast.com basically lets you test your connection. These are some of the minimums. On the upload, you definitely want 5 to 10. 10 is always best. On the download, if you can get around 200, that's even better. Now, some people say you can get away with 100 megabytes on the download. I don't know. I think 200 is safest. And if you want a great connection, I'm telling you right now, that's the way to do it. Now, I pay, if you notice this price right here, I got 225. Let me share with you what that is. What I had happen in the past when I first started doing these virtual conferences is that sometimes I came on at a time where it's just the network was just loaded or overloaded. Like, for example, 10 in the morning on a Monday, guaranteed the network's loaded, right? And so what happened is my calls would drop, tank, or they sound tinny like a robot. And so what I decided to do was invest in what they call business Ethernet. Business Ethernet is basically a cable directly right into your computer, from your modem into your computer. And in my case, for $225, they guaranteed 1 gigabyte of bandwidth, which means I have more than enough. So if you have things that are very critical that you can't afford for that connection to go down, you may want to consider paying a little extra. It's a lot of money. I get it. But you know what's worse? If the connection goes down and now you can't get all these people in the same room again to do your demonstration or your presentation, that's even worse. So consider having a great internet connection and investing just a little more. So those are the highlights for how I set up my studio. Now, I've evolved. I use a different type of camera. I use a Canon camera. This right here is a Vibe board, and it's a more interactive board. I used to use just a simple whiteboard. Now I just use an interactive board. Some people put a television in the background. That works just as well. You can connect the television here, connect it to your laptop, and do your PowerPoint presentation here. Notice what I'm also doing. I'm also standing. Why? If I sat down and just did this presentation, it'd be very static. Notice what I like to do, just my style. Remember, may not be your style, but it's mine. I like being more animated and getting into my presentation. So keep this in mind. Look at what you have today in terms of your studio and ask yourself, where could I upgrade? Do I need better lighting? Do I need a better camera? Do I need a better microphone? That's always a big one. And more importantly, do I have the right connection? Do I have enough bandwidth where I can have a great connection to have a great conversation? So now, that's it. We've leveled the playing field. Now, if everybody has this, we have the great look. Remember, this is your first impression. This is what people see for the first time. So keep in mind that this is what people will walk away with. This first impression is what impacts people. Rebecca, do you have any comments before I move into the presentation phase?
No, I am just over here analyzing my current situation and taking in all of the tips that you're providing. But this is fantastic so far, Victor. Really good, good points.
See that? You're totally backward. Your light source should be in front of you, not behind you. And as you lean forward and back, notice how the light fluctuates. Not picking on you, Rebecca. It's just a good learning moment, right? But just simple things like that can change how you look. And I'm sure that if you've turned the table around, faced the window, you're going to have just a beautiful look. And again, it just looks more pro. So, all right. Now, let's assume that you're looking good right now. Okay. You are looking superstar. How do we prep for a client meeting? How do we get ready for a client meeting? Well, let's talk about some of the things we should do to get ready. First of all, is we need to have a look, right? We need to know what we're going to talk about. But more importantly, we have to find ways to keep the client engaged. So I'm going to give you some tips on virtual engagement, just something to kind of hold people in. So let me go through these real quickly. So I like to send people reminders when we're going to have a meeting, right? Just send reminders. And look what I do, because one of the biggest complaints I often get from people is, Victor, how do I get people to turn their camera on? Well, here's how you do it. You send them a reminder with instructions. Jill, I look forward to seeing you. It'll be great to finally put a face with the name. You just say that, you're basically saying, we're going to do a video. How about the next one? Bill, looking forward to finally having a face-to-face conversation to put what? Face to the voice, whatever it may be. I am basically telling you, turn on your camera. Now, if the subtle remarks don't work, then maybe you want to be a little more direct. So this is, let's call this option 1, option 2, and option 3 for people who don't get it. And that is, in preparation for our meeting, I write this in an email. Please make sure you have your webcam on, which means we're going to do video. Make sure to unmute yourself. Happy face. Let's have some fun. And last but not least, use a pair of headset or earbuds so you don't get the echo. So what are we trying to do here? We're trying to get the person to turn their camera on, because we know if we can get them to turn on the camera, we're going to have more of a connection. So this is important. Now, let's talk about how do we start engaging them. Let's go through this list again. Again, if I'm going through this quickly, you'll just have to pause the video once in a while. Now, sometimes to start out, you have to set the expectations. Listen to me. You have to tell people what to do. You have to become the conductor of the meeting, like truly become a conductor of the meeting. You can't join a meeting, run the meeting, and be passive. No, you have to be the conductor. And here's how you're going to do it. So you set the tone by going first, and you're going to say something like this. I want everyone to give me a 60 seconds. So let's say you have 5 people in the virtual room, right? I want everybody to give me a 60-second, who you are. Tell me what your role is. What are your expectations out of this meeting? I'm asking for expectations, right? And then you say, here's who I am. I'm a senior product manager for Enersys, and I'm here to show you how our new product called the Virtual Power Pack and how it can save your assets. Chuckle, chuckle, joke. And at the end of this meeting, I just want your feedback. Now, look what I'm doing. One is I'm saying, I'm going to go around the room and I want to know what everybody's expectations are, right? Now, I'm going to tell you what my expectation is. What do I want? I want that at the end of the meeting, I just want your feedback on my product. I'm basically orchestrating the meeting. Then I transition into this. I say something like, I point to Bill, so to speak. I say, Bill, give us your 60-second check-in, your role and expectations for this meeting. Now, you just don't go, now here's a mistake people make. After they do the introduction, set the expectation, they go, who wants to go first? Don't ever do that. Don't ever go, who wants to go first? You have to direct, again, you're conducting the meeting. You're going to say, Rebecca, give us your 60-second update and your expectations for the meeting. And again, you got the name at the bottom, so you're going to call people out. You're conducting the meeting. Do not leave it to open, because here's what happens. When you just say, who wants to go next? This happens every time. You say that, everybody kind of like, everybody goes quiet, right? And then nobody talks, right? For like a kind of an uncomfortable 5 seconds. And then after the uncomfortable 5 seconds, you know what happens. 3 people jump in at the same time. Now it gets uncomfortable again, and everybody just stops talking because they're waiting for the other person to say something. Nobody knows what. It's a horrible way to conduct the meeting. But if you just say, Rebecca, why don't you give us your 60-second, your expectation? As soon as Rebecca's done, we go, Jill, why don't you go next? Now, this is how you get them engaged. Now, again, here's what it does. These 3 points here. It gives everyone a chance to talk. That's big. It gives everybody a chance to say something. Also, you set the expectation, and the most important part, you collect some G2, some information as you're going around the room. This gives you the content you need to tailor, customize the presentation for that group. It's kind of cheating, actually, in a good way, because what I'm saying is, hey, tell me what you guys want me to talk about, and that's what I'm going to talk about. You have your set presentation, but you'll make some notes. How do you do that? Check this out. This is like the ultimate tool when it comes to engagement. What you're going to do as everybody's introducing themselves, let me move my head down here. What you're going to do is write down their name and their role as they're introducing themselves, right? And then whatever their expectations, you're going to write it in there. What I usually do is I take a piece of paper and I fold it up, or I just draw the boxes out. I keep this box in front of me. So for example, Rebecca. It'll be Rebecca, senior SDR, got her. Her expectations, don't know about whatever it may be. That's what I want to learn about. Then the next person, Bill. All right, great. Bill is director of HR. He wants to know, wham, whatever it may be. Now what I basically have, if you think of American football, there's always coaches off to the side with play cards. Let's run this play. Let's run that play. This is almost like your play card. What you're going to do is you're going to have this in front of you during your presentation. So if I had it right in front of me right now, during my presentation, I'm going to show certain things. And when I get to what you want to hear about, I say, Rebecca, you mentioned earlier on that you wanted to hear about this. Here's where it really makes sense. Here's why I'm going to show you that. Now, what do you think happens as soon as I say, Rebecca, remember you talked about, I want to know more about this? Let me jump into that right now. Immediately, Rebecca's going to lean forward and go, okay, we're getting to my part right now. And again, by doing this, you're hitting everybody in that list. Now, again, if you get more than 8 people, it becomes a little cumbersome. So you'll try to combine some of these. But if you're going into a meeting and you got a small group of people, by the way, in a virtual scenario, according to the RAIN group, virtual selling, it's a wonderful book by the RAIN group. They said the optimal size when you're doing a live event is 7 to 8 people, right? But when you go virtual, the ideal number of people besides yourself to have on a conversation is actually 3. Beyond 3, it becomes a little unmanageable. But this helps you manage it more effectively because you know what all the expectations are. So again, set the expectations, what you want, and then let everybody go around the room. Everybody gets a chance to talk, but you also get to fill out your scorecard and know what you need to talk about to make sure that everybody's interests are addressed. Okay? Now, let's talk about the actual presentation. So let me slow down because I get excited here. Rebecca, any questions up to this point? Because I've talked about the equipment you'll need, right? And then I talked about how you're going to actually prep the actual audience. Before I move into the presentation phase, any questions?
I was just going to say, I love the game cards like you just mentioned. Now, not much of a athlete, unfortunately, but I do find in large meetings, especially, you do kind of feel sometimes you have to speak up for the sake of being inclusive, showing that you're truly engaged, but to actually have your point or your objective come back to you, it also helps you feel a bit more recognized, acknowledged, kind of keeps the team morale going a bit stronger. So I really love that point, and I will absolutely start using some playing cards.
Excellent. You know, one more thing you can do, Rebecca, and I think it's interesting, and for everybody watching this, is that one of the things I often like to do is to keep people leaning forward, is to say, look, we're going to go through a 30-minute presentation. At the end of the 30-minute presentation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the table, and I want everybody's feedback on what they thought of the software. Just making stuff up. Now everybody's been put on notice. At the end of the meeting, we want one feedback point from you. What do you think everybody's going to start doing now? They're going to start paying attention because they don't want, the end of the meeting, we come to them and they don't have anything to say. So everybody leans forward more. So that's another way of sucking them into the conversation and keeping them engaged. All right, let's move into the virtual presentation. Now, listen carefully. What I'm about to show you is so awesome, not because I'm showing it to you, because it works. And if you know how to apply this in any presentation and you understand the psychology, yes, I said psychology, behind this strategy, your presentations will be that much better. Let's get into it. Now, I got to talk about the brain first before we get into the strategy, but I'm telling you, it'll be worth the time. So just hang in there with me. Now, Daniel Kahneman won a Nobel Prize for this because he said, look, basically we have 2 systems in our brain. He said, we have system 2, we have the logical side, right? He called that system 2. And then he says there's an emotional piece, emotional side, and then there's a survival piece, right? And he said these 2, the emotional survival, are system 1. And what he said was really fascinating. He said, we make our decisions down here. System 1 is our real decision-making process. Is it emotionally impactful? And am I in trouble? In other words, our brains, we're wired to avoid risk, right? So our job when we're selling, if I can put it this way, our job when we're selling is to make people feel safe with the change or with the product we're suggesting, which is really a change, right? If you think about selling is all about change, because if you buy my product or service, you will have to change. And what we need to do is make people feel secure. But let's take it a step further. Kahneman said something along these lines, that when you're presenting to people, keep in mind you're talking to 3 parts of the brain. So let's go through them. We got the logical one. Well, what does that mean? How does that help us? Kahneman said something interesting. On the logical side, what the brain wants are simple messages. Oh, this is a big one. You know this one. Because have you ever been to one of those presentations where they start getting into all the jargon and they talk too technical and you go, I don't get it. That means the logical side, this message is too complicated or too convoluted. Your brain checks out. So we got to keep the messages simple. Simple is always best. Now, let's go to the emotional side. What does that mean, the emotional side? What he was saying is that it's got to impact me. It's got to mean something to me. Said another way, that if you're presenting to me, it's got to mean something to me. If it doesn't mean something to my brain, says, well, I don't care about that. So it has to be impactful. Third part, let's go to the third piece. This is the most important part, survival, right? And that is, again, make me feel safe. Make me feel safe that your solution is safe for me. If I'm going to use your product, make me feel safe. For example, if I'm just using PowerPoint, I feel comfortable using PowerPoint, but I know I need to be more engaging. Maybe I want to use Mentimeter. I'm afraid to use Mentimeter, right? So my job, if I was selling you Mentimeter, would be to make you feel comfortable with making that transition over to Mentimeter, but also showing how it really is a safe choice. And it's going to impact your audience because of all the interaction. And guess what? It's not that hard to use. Point, click, drag, drop, do a slide. If you know PowerPoint, you know Mentimeter. Our job is to make people feel what? That it's simple. They're going to have what? Some impact on their audience. It's going to make a difference. In this case, it's safe to use, not a big deal. By the way, if you have a hard time remembering this acronym, just remember brain. This is all about the brain, and LES, logical, emotional, brainless. That is called the memory tool. Okay. So anyway, you get the point that we basically make decisions on emotion and make sure it's safe. It's all about make me feel safe and let me know how it's really going to impact me. And then maybe logically I'll buy into it if you keep the message simple. Now, I'm not there yet on the good stuff yet. I'm just setting the table right now. I got to tell you one more thing. The brain is a fascinating thing. Right now, you're listening to me. And did you know that your brain represents 2% of your body weight? It represents 2% of your body weight. Did you also know that your brain also chews up 20% of your energy? You ever have those days where you're like, you didn't do anything physical, but you're exhausted because your brain is using up a lot of energy when it's thinking. This is why messages have to be simple, because if they're too complicated, the brain says, let me just divert my attention to something else. Have you ever seen people looking at their phones while you're talking? Here's what's happening. The brain is basically saying, why expend energy here? Let me expend it somewhere else, because what they're saying is not important. It's not impactful. In fact, I don't even feel safe with that solution. So we start looking at our phones. That means we've lost people's attention. So keep in mind that you're fighting against this energy. You want people to pay attention to you, right? But how do you do that? Now we get to the good stuff. I'm telling you again, if you remember this strategy, your presentations will go up like that. In other words, the impact you'll have. Now, let me ask you a question. I'm trying to trick you here, so be warned. Let's say that over here on the left, let me kind of do this again here. Over here on the left, this is your brain, and let's call that attention, right? And let's say you have a presentation that's about 45 minutes that you have to deliver. Let's call it 30 minutes. Let's be generous. 30 minutes. Is it possible? If attention is at 100%, and again, the speaker starts talking here at 100%, is it possible to hold somebody's attention for 30 minutes at 100%? What do you think, Rebecca? Yes or no? Is it possible?
I'm going to try and be a little optimistic here. I think it could be very well possible to end again on 100 and maybe fluctuate between, let's say, 80 and 100 throughout the presentation. I'm not quite sure if it's fully possible for the full 100.
Okay, I love it. No, so let's go with you. Because you're absolutely right. You've seen the speakers. Let me give you 3 types of speakers you're going to meet. And I hope you're going to be type 3. Type 1 speaker is that they start out strong, but then they just die. They don't get better after 30 minutes. Do you ever see that speaker? They're like, wah, 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 like, please, I'm dying here, right? Then there's another type of speaker, type 2. Type 2 is that they start out well, and they kind of hang in there, but they still dip. And then somewhere like right there, they go, in conclusion, or in summary, or in closing. And what happens to your brain when somebody says, I'm closing out, or I'm finishing up? Your brain goes, whoa, 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 let me pay attention because they're closing up, right? But all of a sudden, you've missed all this content because you pointed out, Rebecca, they're dipping, right? And because they're dropping in there, we don't get that information. So they start out strong, they die quickly. Not good. They start out strong, the middle kind of wanes a little bit, and maybe the ending is somewhat good. But the middle, you just lose a lot of content. The type of speaker you want to be, let's go back to what Rebecca was saying. Let's say if there's 100% attention all the way. Is it possible to hold somebody at 100%? No. But Rebecca said something interesting. let's say 80%. Let's say if we can keep them within this band, right? Then guess what? We're good. So this is what realistically happens. You can start out speaking, but then you start like dipping. It happens to the best of the best speakers. But then what do? The best of the best insert something called a pattern interrupt. And a pattern interrupt could be what? Someone says, they'll start talking, they'll start dipping, and then right here, they insert, let's say, a story. Let me tell you a story. And all of a sudden, as soon as they start telling a story, you're back in the game, right? So all of a sudden, your attention just poof, shoots back up. But then they start talking, and what happens again? You start dipping. So what do? I don't know, maybe using something like Mentimeter, they ask a poll question. How's that, right? And all of a sudden, everybody's what? Paying attention again. And this is how you cycle the best of the best presentation. Now, how do you implement this? Every 3 to 5 minutes in your presentation, I want you to insert a pattern interrupt. By the way, what are pattern interrupts? Let's define some of these. What are pattern interrupts? We talked about two. The first one is what? Stories. That's a pattern interrupt. A poll. That's definitely a pattern interrupt. How about if you ask the audience a question? That's definitely a pattern interrupt. By the way, when I do this, is that a pattern interrupt? You bet it is. That's a pattern interrupt. I'm doing it on purpose because I'm switching screen. So let's say switching screens, right? If you show an image, that's a pattern interrupt, like a graphic or visual, right? You can show a video. Is that a pattern interrupt? Of course it is. Now, what if you lay out your 30-minute presentation, and in your 30-minute presentation, you actually plan out, here's my 30-minute presentation, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to cycle them through, right? And then right here I'll call that the 4-minute mark, I'm going to insert a pattern interrupt. Guess what? Somewhere at the 10-minute mark, I'm going to insert another pattern interrupt. You get the idea. What if you pre-plan this? Because that's what I do. I pre-plan my presentation by doing these pattern interrupts. What am I going to say here? What am I going to show here? What am I going to do here to kind of grab the audience? If you simply did this, you'll see attention spans just hang in there within this band. And if you can hold them in that band, you're going to be a more successful presenter. Now, look at your 30-minute presentation from this perspective. Let me go full screen. Okay, full screen here. And I'm going to start wrapping up with this because I want to keep it to 30 minutes. Here's the intro, 1.5 minutes. You come up with that. 3 minutes into your presentation, you may want to what? Like somewhere right here, you may want to insert a pattern interrupt. So what if each of these, by the way, each of these squares is a slide. Slide number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you get the idea. And then after slide 2, you insert a pattern interrupt. You do a couple more, you insert another pattern interrupt. And then the last slide here is your call to action. What do you want them to do? And I'm going to pause and stop right here because, again, I want to be respectful of time and your time. And this is one of the best ways to design a presentation. Lay out how you're going to intro, what your presentation's all about. By the way, call to action, big. You got to know what you're going to ask for when you get to the end. And then throughout the presentation, begin to plan how many pattern interrupts you're going to use. And on that, Rebecca, I'll turn it back over to you.
Amazing, Victor. This was extremely useful, especially for myself working in sales development. I speak to a lot of new people all the time, and I can't tell you how many times I see people cameras off, not engaged. Makes it kind of tough for my call to action to be as crucial and strong as I want it to be.
No, I get it. And by the way, these are basic things you can do. So let's do a quick recap for the folks. One is have your first impression be the best impression of you, right? And again, just because other people aren't doing it doesn't mean you should level up, be better than them, raise your standards. Number 2, again, think about how the brain works. That's always a fascinating thing, how the brain works. We also talked about different ways to engage and get information before you start the presentation. And then build your presentation. And after you do 5 or 7 or 10 presentations, you pretty much know what people are going to ask you. And you pretty much know what pattern interrupts work best versus others.
I do have one question, Victor, before we wrap up. So a lot of these principles, of course, we're talking a lot in the virtual selling space. Can you still implement some of these methods in a physical environment? And if so, what would that look like?
So obviously we don't need the camera piece, but the actual engagement piece, like I'm going to go around the room. Oh, that's exactly where I got it from. Actually, I got it from a live session. That's what I used to do live. So the short answer is yes. Specifically the part where you're asking people for engagements. By the way, I'm going to do a presentation. Let me walk through the presentation. At the end of this presentation, here are my expectations. And just out of curiosity, again, Rebecca, what would you like us to cover? The one thing you definitely want us to cover in this presentation. Great. And then there's nothing wrong with actually jotting a note, because I used to always have a pad with me, just jot it down. And by the way, jotting it down actually lets them know that you actually care what they just said. And you can still do the same thing with the piece of paper, and grid it out. And people won't say anything. It's amazing how people are okay with that. So every strategy I talked about can definitely translate over into the real world.
Great. Well, I can't wait to start using some of these methods. I'll get back to you with some feedback.
There you go. There you go.
Any new sales that I'm making.
Love it. Do I get a commission on those, on the new
Maybe.
sales?
We'll discuss.
We'll take that offline.
But Victor, I really want to thank you again for taking the time to do this. For those of you who were planned to initially come to Victor's live session, hopefully we can get him back for another session in the near future. Otherwise, any questions, feel free to maybe connect with Victor on LinkedIn. He posts a lot of inspirational stuff. Otherwise, check us out at mentimeter.com/webinars and keep an eye out for another session with Victor. Any last words, Victor, before I close this off?
No, thank you guys for your time. Hopefully this has been very useful. Again, as Rebecca pointed out, connect with me on LinkedIn. If you want more information on me, go to victorantonio.com. But I would love to hear how, after you've implemented some of this stuff, how it actually worked for you. That's the feedback I'd love to hear.
We'll start something. Maybe a hashtag Victor Antonio.
Well, there you go. Love it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, everybody. Bye.